My main hope for Australia is that people are just treated fairly, and dare I say it, equally, regardless of one's racial or ethnic background. Obviously, treating people differently because of their perceived racial background only breeds resentment. However, despite Australia supposedly being one of the most egalitarian societies on the planet, it seems my hopes have been dashed yet again. And this recent news story, sent in by so many of you, sadly illustrates exactly what I mean. Children in remote communities denied seats on near-empty Indigenous-only charter flights. Derek Lord, an air traffic services officer in the outback Queensland town of Normanton, said that his two sons, who board at school in Charters Towers, have been turned away from taxpayer-funded flights because they were not Abstudy recipients. According to Services Australia, Abstudy provides financial help for Australian Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander students or apprentices. It pays for things such as boarding fees and travel costs. It's a great program, except it's only made available to people of a certain ethnic background. Mr. Lord said he regularly sees 20-seat government-chartered planes arriving with fewer than half the seats occupied. He said in the statement, "My boys have been left sitting at the airport, bags packed, because they weren't allowed on a plane with empty seats. We'd gladly pay for those seats, anything to avoid the 6-day ordeal we have to go through with commercial flights to get them home for the holidays when roads were cut off due to flooding." In a radio interview, he also said, "The carrier even agreed to take our money, but the booking company that now does it, which is overseas, refused to allow our children to get on because they don't meet the criteria. We don't understand it. It's taxpayer funded. Even if we weren't willing to pay, the plane is coming here. It's being paid for by everyone's taxes, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. The kids are from the same town." He said because of recent flooding, there was no way to get our kids home unless it's on a private charter ourselves or through Rex, and Rex can be up to 2-3 weeks waiting for a seat. Even Indigenous leaders here don't understand it. I don't think it's about reconciliation. I think it's more about that the system is broken. And in a final piece of insightful social commentary, he said, "The gap is not a gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, it's regional versus non-regional. If you actually compared the two, I think you'd find many of the non-Indigenous kids and families have the same disadvantages as Indigenous people in rural or remote communities." Local member for Traeger in Queensland, Robbie Kata, seen here pictured with Mr. Lord, commented on the situation. "This is not an Indigenous problem, it's a remote living problem. When you've got families living in the same town, sending their kids to the same school, but being treated differently, that's wrong. It risks creating division in communities where it doesn't exist. We had a capable, locally based operator with 20 years' experience and regional knowledge. Now we've got a foreign company charging up to $1,781 per Abstudy seat, almost triple what a regular flight costs, and delivering a shambolic service. Kids are being left stranded. Rural and remote families are being ignored. It's time these services were made available to any child living remotely, not just those eligible under a narrow government program, and return to experienced local operators who know the land, know the people, and care about the outcomes." That sounds like too much common sense, Mr. Kata. Sadly, this racialisation of services isn't limited to air travel for children. The New South Wales Budget was delivered recently by Treasurer Daniel Muki. As identity politics seems to be the most important issue of late, according to SBS, Mr. Muki is the first person of Indian and Hindu origin to become a member of New South Wales Parliament. He is also the first parliamentarian in Australian history to be sworn into office on the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu scripture. In his latest budget, there's plenty of money for everybody. According to the New South Wales government's own media release, they've allocated $51.2 million for recruiting new apprentices and trainees, $78.5 million for cost of living relief to pensioners. Sounds all right. Oh, I forgot to mention, $731 million to support Aboriginal communities, $210 million for Aboriginal housing, and $200 million for culturally safe early education. Your taxpayer money hard at work. Of course, it's not just New South Wales spending money hand over fist. Queensland has promised $167 million for women, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partnerships and multiculturalism. The Western Australian budget promises lots of money for so-called Aboriginal well-being, not just millions, but tens of millions of dollars in programs specifically for Aboriginal Western Australians. In the latest South Australian budget, they are also throwing millions of dollars at Aboriginal residents, remote Aboriginal housing, $12 million, alternatives to custody, closing the gap, $8.1 million, Aboriginal community colleges, $10.9 million, $5 million for grants to Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, $4.3 million to support the safety and well-being of remote Aboriginal visitors, $3 million to divert Aboriginal children who have been charged with a minor offence away from a custodial environment. You get the idea. Millions of dollars if you have the right DNA. Of course, the Australian federal government have much more money to spend, such as ABC. Federal government pledges $840 million towards closing the gap in remote Northern Territory communities. National Indigenous Times, First Nations communities across the country will receive $1.3 billion towards closing the gap. Ah yes, closing the gap. You know, that state-sanctioned, taxpayer-funded spending spree to help Indigenous Australians? You know the one. Closing the Gap report shows First Nations incarceration rates are climbing. Children are bearing the brunt of the Closing the Gap failures. Stolen generations never ended, worsening outcomes for Indigenous communities. Even Senator Lydia Thorpe is calling for it to be scrapped. Lydia Thorpe, why the Closing the Gap strategy must be scrapped. And now we have kids being told they can't fly on taxpayer-funded planes to get to school because they're not the right ethnicity. My God.